the Gospels, we see Jesus turn a group of ordinary men into incredibly effective disciples who are willing to go out and tell the entire world about him. One important element that Jesus used in his relationship with the disciples was the process of invitation and challenge. He invited people into relationship and he challenged them to change. In Matthew 16, starting with verse 13, we read, Jesus then went to Caesarea Philippi. Jesus said to his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" The disciples responded, "Some say John the Baptist, and some say Elijah, and some say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets." At this point, Jesus is being highly invitational and not challenging. He's just asking for other people's thoughts, not the disciples' own thoughts. Then Jesus goes on, "And you, who do you say that I am?" Peter answered, "You are the anointed one. You are the Son of the living God." So here's a bit of a challenge. Who do you say I am? He's asking for personal thoughts. And now the invitation is going to be increased. We see an increase in invitation and then challenge, and it continues to move. Jesus said, "Simon, son of Jonah, your knowledge is a mark of blessing, for you didn't learn this truth from your friends or from teachers or from sages you've met on the way. You learned it from my Father in heaven. This is why I have called you Peter, or rock, for on this rock I will build my church. The church will reign triumphant even at the gates of hell. Peter, I give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." So we have high invitation. Jesus affirms that Simon is blessed, changes his name, and gives him keys to the kingdom. Now for some more high challenge. Jesus ordered his disciples to keep these teachings secret. He said, "You must tell no one that I am the anointed." Then Jesus began to tell the disciples about what would happen to him. He said he would have to go to Jerusalem. There the elders, chief priests, and scribes would meet him. He would suffer at their hands, and he would be killed. But 3 days later, he would be raised to new life. As Jesus spoke of the things to come, Peter took him aside. Sad and confused and maybe a little bit prideful, Peter chastised Jesus. "No, Lord, never. These things that you're saying, they will never happen to you." But Jesus turned to Peter and said, "Get away from me, Satan. You are a stumbling block before me. You are not thinking about God's story. You are thinking about some distorted story of fallen, broken people." There is high challenge here and the context of high invitation. Jesus continues, "If you want to follow me, you must deny yourself the things you think you want. You must pick up your cross and follow me. The person who wants to save his life must lose it, and the one who loses their life for me will find it." So throughout the Gospels and in early church history, we know the disciples grew into people who did this, who forsake what they wanted and responded to this invitation and challenge that Jesus offered. In a relationship with a disciple, a woman that I was discipling, we had the opportunity not only to meet and build our relationship with one another, but we also had an opportunity to reach out to care for another woman who was preparing for a surgery. So, since I had participated in praying for someone prior to a surgery many times, I invited this woman to go with me. We talked about it ahead of time. She had some questions, some reservations. She was a little nervous, but she came with me. She accepted the challenge and came with me. And we were able to pray for this friend and give her some courage and encouragement before her surgery. And then we were able to talk about it afterwards to see what was uncomfortable, how did she make it through it? And it was a really good experience for both of us. So let's look at our quadrant here. We have different relationships in our lives, and those that fall into a high amount of invitation, but a low amount of challenge to change, so highly relational, but low challenge to change, these are cozy relationships. They fall in that cozy quadrant or cozy zone. There's just not, it's very warm and fuzzy, but it's not going to give you a high encouragement to change. Other relationships that have a high amount of challenge, but a low amount of relational investment are in the stressed quadrant or the stressed zone. These may be, they could be anywhere, but it may be a relationship at work where there's a high emphasis on getting jobs done, taking care of tasks, but a very low emphasis on the relationship. And so it's a very stressful relationship to continue. Other relationships where there's a low amount of challenge to change and a low amount of invitation into that relational equity, these relationships fall into the bored quadrant or bored zone. There's not a whole lot of encouragement to stay in that relationship, and unless there is some major change, that relationship is probably going to fall away. And then we have those relationships that have a high degree of challenge, but also a high degree of relational invitation. These relationships will fall into this breakthrough quadrant or breakthrough zone. This is the type of relationship that Jesus had with his disciples. Oftentimes, he would invite them into a deeper amount of relationship, but he would also challenge them, whether it was through helping with feeding thousands of people or having them calm down in the middle of a storm. There were many times where Jesus would have that relational equity with them, but he also challenged them into a greater sense of transformation and breakthrough. If we are on outside of this breakthrough quadrant in any other zone, we will want to move, or we may want to, in some of those relationships, we may want to move directly to the breakthrough zone from wherever we are, except that's not exactly how it works. If we are in the cozy zone, we are going to have to increase the level of challenge that is coming. And so to do that, we're going to have to go into that stressed zone a bit before we move into the breakthrough zone. And this may make us feel a little bit like we're going through the valley of the shadow of death. That's hard for a relationship, and it's especially if we haven't had that challenge to change in that relationship prior, it can really cause a lot of stress. And so we need to make sure we increase the amount of relational availability there as well. But that does, just to be aware, there's going to be some difficulty there. If we're moving from the stressed zone into the breakthrough zone, we're going to need to add some additional relational investment. We won't have that same valley of the shadow of doubt experience. However, for people who are task-driven, it can feel like a waste of time because this needs to be time with people with no agendas or tasks. And it's really vital to those relationships. If you're bored, if those relationships that are in the bored zone, if you're wanting to move one of those relationships to a breakthrough relationship where you see transformation in that relationship, you're going to have to start by either moving into the cozy zone or into the stressed zone to be able to move through increasing that balancing back and forth, increasing the invitation, increasing the challenge a little bit at a time. But we can balance carefully our invitation and challenge as we disciple, and that will encourage our disciples to continue to grow and experience transformation.